The sun was setting over the mining colony of Verath 7, painting the rocky landscape in shades of orange and purple that reminded Marcus Cole of the sunsets back on Earth, a place he had not seen in over 15 years now. Marcus was a supply runner, a man who drove his heavy transport truck across the dangerous canyons and mountains of this alien world, delivering food and equipment to the smaller outposts scattered across the planet. And today had been like any other day until it was not. His truck rumbled along the dusty canyon road when something caught his eye, a glint of metal where there should have been only rock and sand, and he slowed down to get a better look at what lay ahead. What he saw made his heart stop for just a moment. A ship had crashed into the canyon wall, its hull torn open like paper, smoke still rising from the wreckage even though it looked like the crash had happened days ago, and Marcus knew immediately that this was not a human vessel. The design was unmistakable with its curved wings and scaled armor plating that shimmered even in its damaged state, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what he was looking at. This was a Draconith ship. The Draconith were a proud and ancient species that looked like the dragons from old Earth legends, standing tall on two legs with wings folded against their backs and scales that came in every color imaginable, and they were known throughout the galaxy for two things above all else. They were incredibly powerful warriors who had never lost a war, and they absolutely despised humans. Marcus should have called it into the colony and waited for a proper team to investigate, but something pulled him toward the wreckage, a feeling he could not explain, and he found himself climbing out of his truck and walking toward the broken ship. The smell hit him first, the sharp scent of burned metal and something else underneath it, something that made his stomach turn, and he knew before he even looked inside what he would find. Bodies. 3 adult Draconith lay among the wreckage, their once magnificent scales now dull and lifeless, their great wings torn and broken, and Marcus removed his cap out of respect for the dead even though these beings would have likely killed him on sight if they had been alive. He was about to turn back and make the call he should have made from the start when he heard it. A sound so small and so weak that he almost missed it entirely. A tiny whimper coming from beneath the wing of the largest Draconith, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat as he moved closer to investigate. What he found there changed everything. A baby Draconith, no bigger than a housecat, huddled beneath its dead mother, its tiny body shaking with fear and hunger, its scales so dull they looked almost gray instead of the brilliant gold they should have been. The little creature looked up at Marcus with eyes that seemed far too large for its small face, golden eyes filled with terror and confusion, and something else that Marcus recognized immediately. Hunger. The baby was starving, probably had been for days since the crash, surviving on nothing while it waited beside its mother for help that never came, and Marcus felt something break inside his chest at the sight of such suffering. He knew the rules about the Draconith and their young, knew that touching one of their children was considered the worst crime imaginable in their culture, knew that wars had been started over less than what he was thinking about doing right now. But how could he walk away from this? Marcus slowly sat down on a piece of wreckage, keeping his movements calm and slow so he would not scare the little one any more than it already was, and he reached into his pack to pull out his lunch ration bar. The baby watched him with those huge golden eyes, not moving from its spot beneath its mother, but Marcus could see its tiny nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of food. He unwrapped the ration bar and took a bite, chewing slowly while the baby continued to watch him, and it was in that moment that their eyes met and Marcus saw something that would stay with him forever. The little dragon was not begging or crying or making any demands at all. It simply looked at him with an expression that needed no translation across species or cultures, or the vast distances of space. "Can I eat with you?" That was what those eyes were asking, not demanding or expecting, just hopping with the kind of pure innocent hope that only the very young can possess, and Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes that he quickly blinked away. He broke his ration bar in half and held out one piece toward the baby, his hand steady even though his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. For a long moment nothing happened, and Marcus wondered if the little one was too scared or too weak to move. But then slowly, so very slowly, the baby Draconith crept out from under its mother and took one shaky step toward him. Then another step and another, until finally the tiny creature was close enough to sniff the food in his hand, its small snout twitching as it took in the unfamiliar scent. It looked up at him one more time, as if asking permission, and Marcus nodded gently and whispered words that felt right even though he knew the baby could not understand them. "Go ahead, little one, it is yours." The baby took the food so gently from his hand that Marcus barely felt it, and then it ate with the desperate speed of someone who had not eaten in far too long, and Marcus found himself smiling through the tears that he no longer tried to hide. When the food was gone, the baby looked up at him again and made a small chirping sound that sounded almost like a question, and Marcus laughed softly and gave it his other half of the ration bar without a second thought. He would go hungry tonight, but that did not matter, not when this little life was depending on him, not when those golden eyes looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of trust. The sun finished setting and darkness crept across the canyon, and Marcus knew he had a choice to make about what happened next. He could leave the baby here and call it in, and let others decide its fate, or he could do something that would probably get him in more trouble than he had ever been in his entire life. The baby finished eating, and then did something that surprised Marcus completely. It crawled into his lap and curled up against his chest, and closed its eyes with a small sigh of contentment. And just like that, the choice was made. "I guess you are coming home with me," Marcus said softly, as he carefully wrapped his jacket around the sleeping baby and held it close to his heart where it could feel his warmth. He did not know what tomorrow would bring or what consequences awaited him for this decision, but as he carried the tiny dragon back to his truck and began the long drive home, Marcus Cole knew one thing for certain. He would protect this little one with everything he had, no matter what the cost might be. The colony was quiet when Marcus arrived back late that night, most of the workers already asleep in their quarters after long shifts in the mines, and he was grateful for the darkness that helped him hide what he was carrying. The baby dragon was still sleeping inside his jacket, its small body warm against his chest, and every now and then it would make little sounds in its sleep that made Marcus smile despite the fear growing in his stomach. What was he doing? This was madness, and he knew it, absolute madness that could start a war between humans and the Draconith Confederacy. But every time he thought about turning back or calling for help, he would feel the tiny heartbeat against his own, and all those thoughts would disappear. He made it to his small living quarters without being seen, and gently placed the sleeping baby on his bed before locking the door and letting out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. The baby stirred and opened its golden eyes to look around the unfamiliar room, and for a moment Marcus worried it would panic and make noise that would bring people running. But instead the little dragon just looked at him with those trusting eyes and made a soft chirping sound that seemed to say it felt safe here with him. "I need to give you a name," Marcus said softly as he sat down on the bed beside the tiny creature and watched it yawn, revealing small teeth that would one day grow into fearsome fangs. The baby had a patch of scales on its chest that were slightly darker than the rest, almost like a small flame shape, and Marcus smiled as the perfect name came to him. "Ember. I think I will call you Ember." The baby chirped again as if approving of the name, and then crawled back into his lap, seeking warmth and comfort. Over the next few days, Marcus learned just how difficult it was to keep a baby dragon hidden in a mining colony where everyone knew everyone else, and secrets were almost impossible to keep. Ember needed to eat often, and the regular ration bars were not enough to keep her healthy. So Marcus spent hours reading everything he could find about Draconoth biology, and then used his access to the food synthesizers to create special protein mixtures that would give Ember what she needed. He started skipping his own meals to make sure Ember had enough, telling himself that he could handle being hungry but she could not. And slowly, day by day, he watched her scales begin to change from dull gray to a beautiful shimmering gold. She was getting stronger and healthier and more energetic, which created new problems because a bored baby dragon was apparently a very destructive baby dragon. Marcus came home one evening to find his pillow torn to shreds and Ember looking very proud of herself as she sat among the feathers, and he could not even be angry because she looked so happy. "You are going to be the death of me, little one," he said with a laugh as he cleaned up the mess, while Ember followed him around chirping excitedly. The bond between them grew stronger every day in ways that Marcus did not fully understand. Ember would wait by the door when he left for work and would greet him with excited chirps and flapping wings when he returned. And at night, she would curl up on his chest and fall asleep listening to his heartbeat. She started mimicking things he did, tilting her head when he tilted his and making sounds that almost seemed like she was trying to talk back when he spoke to her. Marcus had never had children of his own, had never really thought about being a father. But now, he understood what that kind of love felt like, and it was the most powerful thing he had ever experienced. But secrets do not stay secret forever, especially not in a place like Verath 7. It was a woman named Rosa who first noticed something strange, commenting on how Marcus was always in a hurry to get home, and how he had been losing weight even though he claimed to be eating fine. Then old Tom from the engineering section mentioned that someone had been using the food synthesizers at odd hours to make protein compounds that did not match any human dietary needs. And finally, a young miner named Jin heard strange sounds coming from Marcus's quarters one night, sounds that definitely did not come from any human throat. The rumors started spreading, and soon enough they reached the ears of Colony Administrator Wei, a stern woman who had been running Verath 7 for over 20 years and who did not tolerate anything that might threaten her colony. She appeared at Marcus's door one evening with 2 security guards and a look on her face that made his blood run cold. "Open the door, Marcus," she said in a voice that made it clear this was not a request, and Marcus knew that his time of hiding was over. When the door opened and Administrator Wei saw Ember sitting on the bed, her golden scales now bright and beautiful, her small wings spread in alarm at the strangers, the administrator's face went pale. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" she asked in a whisper that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. "I saved her life," Marcus replied simply, standing between Wei and Ember like a shield. "You may have doomed us all," Wei snapped back, her composure breaking for just a moment before she regained control of herself. She explained to Marcus what he already knew deep down, that the Draconoth had laws that were older than human civilization itself, laws that said their young were sacred beyond measure, and that any outsider who touched a Draconoth child could be put to death. If the Draconoth discovered what Marcus had done, they might see it as kidnapping or worse, and they had destroyed entire planets for smaller offenses in the past. "We have to contact them and return the child immediately," Wei declared, but before she could say anything else, Ember did something unexpected. She flew across the room on her small wings and landed on Marcus's shoulder, wrapping her tail around his arm and hissing at Administrator Wei like she was protecting him from a threat. Wei stared at this display with wide eyes, and Marcus felt his heart swell with emotion at how this tiny creature was trying to defend him. "She will not go," Marcus said quietly but firmly, "and I will not make her go, not after everything we have been through together." Administrator Wei looked at the man and the dragon for a long moment, and something in her hard expression softened just slightly as she saw the bond between them. "You stubborn fool," she said finally with a sigh. "You had better hope the Draconith never come looking for their missing ship, because if they do, we are all in very serious trouble." But even as she said the words, Marcus could see that she was not going to force him to give up Ember, at least not yet, and he whispered a thank you that she pretended not to hear. That night Marcus held Ember close and made her a promise that he intended to keep no matter what the future might bring. "I will never let anyone take you away from me," he whispered as she drifted off to sleep. "You are my family now, and I will protect you with my life." He did not know that his promise would be tested much sooner than he expected. The alarms started screaming across the colony at dawn 3 weeks after Administrator Wei had discovered the truth about Ember, and Marcus knew in his gut that the moment he had been dreading had finally arrived. He rushed to the window of his quarters and looked up at the sky to see something that made his heart feel like it had stopped beating entirely. A Draconith warship hung in the sky above the colony, massive and terrifying, its dark hull covered in patterns that looked like dragon scales, and it was descending toward the landing pad with a terrible grace that spoke of absolute power. Ember sensed his fear and pressed against his leg, making worried sounds as she looked up at him with those golden eyes that had become the center of his world. "It will be okay, little one," Marcus said, even though he was not sure he believed it himself. "I will not let anything happen to you." The colony erupted into chaos as people ran to their stations and security teams mobilized, and Administrator Wei's voice came over the communication system, ordering everyone to remain calm. But how could anyone remain calm when the Draconith had come? Marcus picked up Ember and held her close as he made his way toward the central plaza where the warship was landing, knowing that hiding would only make things worse and that he had to face whatever was coming. The ship touched down with a sound like thunder, and for a moment everything was silent, the entire colony holding its breath as the massive doors began to open. What emerged was the most frightening thing Marcus had ever seen in his life. Draconith warriors poured out of the ship, each one standing over 2 meters tall with scales of red and black and weapons that looked like they could cut through steel like paper, and at their head walked a figure that made even the other warriors seem small. War Commander Sithrak was a legend among both Draconith and humans, a warrior who had fought in 100 battles and won them all, and his body told the story of those victories in the scars that covered his dark blue scales. His eyes were the color of molten gold, and they swept across the gathered humans with a look of pure contempt that made several people step backward in fear. "I am War Commander Sithrak of the Draconith Confederacy," he announced in a voice that seemed to shake the air itself. 3 weeks ago, one of our transport ships went missing in this sector, and we have tracked its signal to this world. Administrator Wei stepped forward with courage that Marcus admired, even as he saw her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "We discovered the wreckage of your ship in a canyon 60 kilometers from here," she said with a steadiness in her voice that did not match her shaking hands. "There were no survivors that we found." Sithrak's eyes narrowed, and Marcus could see the muscles in his jaw tighten with barely contained anger. "You lie, human," he growled. "Our sensors detect a Draconith life signature in this very colony, the signature of a hatchling, and I want to know why you are hiding one of our young." The crowd parted, and every eye turned to Marcus, who stood near the back still holding Ember in his arms, and he knew that there was nowhere to run and no point in trying. He walked forward through the crowd with Ember pressed against his chest, her small body shaking with fear as she saw the massive warriors of her own kind for the first time in her young life, and Marcus felt like he was walking toward his own execution. Sithrak stared at the human holding the Draconith hatchling, and something dangerous flashed in his golden eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded in a voice that promised violence. "You took our child. You kept her from her people." "I found her in the wreckage," Marcus said, keeping his voice as steady as he could even though his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Her mother was dead, all the adults were dead, and she was starving and alone, and I could not just leave her there to die." "So you kidnapped her?" Sithrak roared, and the warriors behind him raised their weapons in response to their commander's anger. "I saved her," Marcus shouted back with a courage he did not know he possessed. "I fed her when she was hungry and kept her warm when she was cold and loved her when she had no one else in the universe to love her." Sithrak took a step forward, and Marcus was sure this was the end, that the war commander was going to strike him down right here in front of everyone. But then something happened that stopped everything. Ember unwrapped herself from Marcus's arms and spread her small wings wide, placing herself between the human and the Draconith warrior, and she let out a hiss that was far too fierce to be coming from such a tiny creature. She was protecting Marcus the way he had protected her. Sithrak froze and stared at the hatchling with an expression that shifted from rage to confusion to something that looked almost like shock. "This cannot be," he said in a voice that had lost all of its thunder. "She is defending the human, she has chosen him." One of the other warriors stepped forward, an older female with silver scales and wise eyes that seemed to understand things the others did not. "War Commander," she said carefully, "the child has imprinted on this human. Look at her behavior and tell me I am wrong." Sithrak looked at Ember again, at the way she stood guard over Marcus, at the way her small body trembled with determination to protect the one she loved, and his fearsome face showed emotions that Marcus had never expected to see on a Draconith. "Imprinting is sacred," Sithrak said slowly as if speaking the words to himself. "It is a bond that cannot be forced or faked. A hatchling will only imprint on someone they trust with their entire being." He turned his golden eyes to Marcus, and when he spoke again his voice was quieter but no less intense. "No hatchling has ever imprinted on a non-Draconith in all of our recorded history. What did you do to earn such trust from one of our children?" Marcus reached down and gently picked up Ember, who immediately relaxed in his arms and pressed her head against his chest. "She was hungry," Marcus said simply. "She looked at me like she was asking if she could share my food, and I gave her half of everything I had. That is all I did, that is the whole story." Sithrak stared at him for what felt like an eternity, and Marcus could not read what was going on behind those ancient golden eyes. Finally, the war commander spoke in a voice that had changed completely from the threatening tone he had used before. "You will come with us to our ship human. You will face the judgment of our laws, and we will determine the truth of what you say." Marcus looked down at Ember, and then back up at the massive warrior standing before him. "Will you let me stay with her?" he asked. "She will be scared without me." Sithrak's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. "You may stay with the child," he said, "until your fate is decided." And so Marcus Cole walked onto the Draconith warship with Ember in his arms, not knowing if he would ever walk off of it again, but knowing that at least they were together, and that was all that mattered. The inside of the Draconith warship was like nothing Marcus had ever seen before, with walls that seemed to be made of living metal that pulsed with soft light, and corridors that curved and twisted in ways that made no sense to his human eyes. Ember clung to him tightly as they were escorted through the ship by warriors who watched them with expressions of distrust and curiosity, and something else that Marcus could not quite identify. They were brought to a massive circular chamber at the heart of the ship, a place called the Hall of Judgment according to the silver-scaled female who walked beside them with something almost like kindness in her ancient eyes. The chamber was filled with Draconith of all colors and sizes, warriors and elders and officials, who had gathered to witness something that had apparently never happened before in their long history. At the center of the room was a raised platform with a single chair, and above it floated an orb of pure white flame that cast no heat, but filled the chamber with a light that seemed to see into the very soul. War Commander Sithrak stood at the front of the gathered crowd, and his voice echoed through the chamber as he spoke. "This human stands accused of taking a child of our people," he announced. "By our ancient laws his fate depends upon his intent, and so we shall use the memory flame to see the truth of what lies in his heart." Marcus looked at the floating flame and felt fear crawling up his spine like a living thing. "What is the memory flame?" he asked the silver-scaled female who had stayed close to him throughout their walk through the ship. "It is an ancient device that shows your true memories and emotions to all who witness," she explained gently. "It cannot lie and it cannot be fooled. Whatever you truly felt and thought will be seen by everyone in this chamber." Marcus nodded slowly and felt Ember nuzzle against his neck, as if trying to comfort him. "I have nothing to hide," he said with more confidence than he felt. "I will face your judgment." Sithrak gestured for Marcus to approach the platform, and he did so with legs that felt like they might give out at any moment, climbing the steps and sitting in the chair while Ember refused to leave his arms. "The child stays with him," came a new voice, ancient and powerful, and Marcus turned to see the oldest draconeth he had ever encountered. She was massive even for her kind, with scales that had faded from their original color to a soft silver white that spoke of countless centuries of life, and her eyes held a wisdom that made Marcus feel like a small child standing before the universe itself. "Elder Matriarch Vaynara," Sithrak said with a bow of his head that showed deep respect, "I did not know you would be attending." "A hatchling has imprinted on a human," the ancient female replied as she slowly made her way to stand before Marcus. "How could I not witness such an impossible thing with my own eyes?" She looked at Marcus, and then at Ember, and something shifted in her expression that he could not understand. "Begin the memory flame," she commanded, and the white orb above Marcus began to pulse with brighter light. At first Marcus felt nothing, and then suddenly it was as if his entire mind was being opened like a book, and the memories started to flow. The gathered draconeth saw everything. They saw Marcus finding the crashed ship and feeling the horror of discovering the dead adults inside. They saw him hearing the tiny whimper and following it to find Ember huddled beneath her mother. They saw the moment their eyes met, that silent question passing between two beings who could not speak to each other, but understood each other perfectly anyway. "Can I eat with you?" They saw Marcus break his ration bar in half and offer it to the starving hatchling, and they felt what he felt in that moment, a wave of compassion so pure and powerful that several of the watching draconeth actually gasped. The memories continued to flow, and the draconeth saw Marcus smuggling Ember back to the colony and researching draconeth nutrition late into the night. They saw him going hungry so that she could eat and staying awake when she was sick, and crying quietly when he thought he might lose her. They saw him defending her against Administrator Wei and promising to protect her with his life, and they felt the love in his heart, a love that had no expectation of reward or recognition. They saw Marcus playing with Ember and laughing when she destroyed his pillow, and watching with joy as her scales turned from dull gray to beautiful gold, and they felt how proud he was of her progress. They saw him holding her at night and whispering that everything would be okay, even when he was terrified of what the future might bring. And through it all they felt one emotion that overwhelmed everything else. Love. Not the love of a captor for a prize or a thief for stolen treasure, but the love of a parent for a child. Pure and unconditional, and willing to sacrifice everything. The memory flame dimmed, and Marcus sat in the chair with tears streaming down his face, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. The chamber was completely silent for a long moment, and then a sound broke through that shocked everyone present. Elder Matriarch Vaynara was weeping. Great tears rolled down her ancient silver scales as she looked at the human who had done something no one had ever expected a human could do, and when she spoke her voice shook with emotion. "In all my centuries of life I have never seen such a thing," she said. "This human has the heart of a Draconith mother. He loved our child as his own when he had no reason to do so, when doing so put his very life at risk." She turned to address the gathered crowd, her tears still flowing freely. "We have always believed that humans were lesser beings, incapable of true compassion, driven only by greed and self-interest. But this man has shown us that we were wrong." Sithrak stepped forward, and Marcus could see that even the fearsome war commander had been affected by what he had witnessed. "The law is clear about intent," Sithrak said in a voice that struggled to remain steady. "This human did not take the child with malice or greed. He saved her life out of pure love, and that is something I cannot condemn." He looked at Marcus with eyes that held no more hostility, only a deep respect that crossed the vast divide between their species. "But the decision is not mine alone to make," he continued. "Elder Matriarch, what is your judgment?" Vaynara moved closer to Marcus and reached out with one massive clawed hand to gently touch Ember, who chirped happily at the contact. "The child has chosen," Vaynara said softly, "and the heart of her chosen has proven worthy. I declare that this human is innocent of any crime against our people." A murmur went through the crowd, and Marcus felt hope blooming in his chest for the first time since this nightmare had begun. But what came next surpassed anything he had dared to hope for. Elder Matriarch Vaynara raised her hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent immediately, every eye in the chamber fixed upon the ancient Draconith as she prepared to speak words that would echo through history. "For thousands of years, we have had a sacred title that we give only to those who prove themselves worthy of raising our young," she began, her voice carrying the weight of countless generations. "It is the highest honor a non-parent can receive in our culture, and it has never been given to anyone outside our species." She looked at Marcus with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. "Until today." Marcus felt his heart stop as the meaning of her words began to sink in. "I declare this human to be kin guardian of the hatchling Ember," Vaynara announced in a voice that rang through the chamber like a bell. "He shall have all the rights and responsibilities of a Draconith parent, and any who threaten him or his child shall face the full wrath of our confederacy." The chamber erupted into chaos as voices rose in shock and disbelief and wonder. But through it all Marcus could only stare at the elder matriarch with tears flowing down his face. "I do not understand," he managed to say. "Why would you do this for me?" Vaynara smiled, and it was the first time Marcus had ever seen a Draconith smile. "Because you did something we believed impossible," she replied gently. "You loved one of our children without condition or expectation. You proved that the heart can bridge any divide if it is pure enough, and that is a gift beyond measure." War Commander Sithrak approached Marcus and did something that shocked everyone watching. He knelt before the human and bowed his great scarred head. "I was ready to kill you when I arrived at your colony," he admitted. "I was certain you had stolen our child for some terrible purpose, but I was wrong and I ask for your forgiveness." Marcus reached out and placed a hand on the warrior's shoulder, a gesture that would have meant death just hours ago. "There is nothing to forgive," Marcus said. "You were protecting your people. I would have done the same for Ember." Sithrak looked up, and there was something new in his fierce eyes, something that looked almost like the beginning of friendship. "You already have done the same," he said, "and that is why I will personally ensure that your name is known throughout the Confederacy as a friend to our kind." The months that followed changed everything for humans and Draconith alike. News of what had happened spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The story of the human who had saved a starving dragon child and loved her as his own, and something shifted in how the two species saw each other. The Draconith Confederacy opened diplomatic channels with humanity for the first time in over 500 years, starting negotiations that had seemed impossible just months before. And at the center of it, All stood Marcus Cole with Ember at his side. Ember was growing fast now, already the size of a large dog with wings that could carry her short distances and flames that she was just beginning to learn to control. And she remained devoted to Marcus in a way that touched the hearts of everyone who witnessed their bond. Draconith visitors began arriving at Verath 7, curious about the colony where such an extraordinary thing had happened, and they were surprised to find humans who welcomed them with genuine warmth. Marcus became something he had never expected to be, an ambassador between two peoples who had been enemies for centuries, and he approached the role with the same simple kindness that had started it all. Just share a meal with them, he would tell nervous colonists before meetings with Draconith delegations. Food has a way of bringing people together no matter where they come from. And he was right, as shared meals led to shared stories, which led to shared laughter, which led to something that looked remarkably like friendship, beginning to bloom between species that had only known distrust. 6 months after the trial, Marcus sat on a cliff overlooking the colony as the sun set in brilliant colors across the alien sky, and Ember lay beside him with her head resting in his lap, while he gently scratched behind her horns. She was beautiful now, her scales a brilliant gold that caught the fatting light like living fire, and she purred contentedly as they watched the day end together. A young Draconith approached them hesitantly, one of the recent visitors who had come to see the famous human and his dragon child with their own eyes. "May I sit with you?" the young one asked politely, and Marcus smiled and gestured to the empty space beside him. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while watching the sunset, and then the young Draconith asked the question that everyone eventually asked. "Why did you help her that day in the canyon?" they said quietly. "She was not your kind, she was supposed to be your enemy. Why did you risk everything for her?" Marcus looked down at Ember, who had opened her golden eyes to watch him with the same trust she had shown from the very beginning. And he thought about all the ways he could answer that question. He could talk about morality and compassion, and the bonds that connect all living things. He could explain the philosophy of helping those in need, regardless of who they are. He could give a speech about breaking down barriers and building bridges between peoples. But in the end, he chose to answer with the simple truth that had guided him from the start. "She was hungry," Marcus said softly as he stroked Ember's scales. "She was scared, she was alone, and she looked at me like she was asking if she could share my food." He turned to look at the young Draconith with warmth in his eyes. "That made her my kind." The young Draconith stared at him for a long moment, and then slowly nodded as understanding dawned on their face. "That is why they say you have the heart of a Draconith mother," they said with wonder in their voice. Marcus laughed softly, and Ember chirped happily at the sound. "I just have a human heart," he replied, "and sometimes that is enough." The sun finished setting, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere across the galaxy, the story of Marcus Cole and his dragon daughter continued to spread. It was told in Draconith halls and human colonies, and on ships traveling through the endless void between stars, and everywhere it went it carried the same message. That kindness is the most powerful force in the universe. That love can bridge any divide. And that sometimes the most ordinary act of sharing your food with someone who is hungry can change the fate of worlds. Ember looked up at Marcus and made a soft sound that needed no translation. "I love you too, little one," he whispered as he held her close under the emerging stars. "I love you too." And in that moment, on a cliff overlooking a colony on a world far from Earth, a man and a dragon sat together in perfect peace, proof that the galaxy was bigger than fear and older than hatred and full of possibilities that no one had ever imagined. All because one human had answered the simplest question in the universe, with the only answer that mattered. "Can I eat with you?" "Yes, you can,"